Hey guys, TommyBryson here, and the stock market, it's massive. Over 3,000 stocks. If you want to pick a stock, you might make money. Most likely, you're going to lose money. And it takes hours of research to know how to pick the right stocks. So the next best thing, which is passive, low risk, and also easy, is index funds, okay? And index funds are you basically putting money into a fund that tracks a certain part of the market. And you have a lot of famous ones out there, famous indexes, for example, the S&P 500, the NASDAQ, the Dow Jones, the Russell 2000 or Russell 3000 or Russell 1000, right? There are a lot of indexes out there that are very famous, but in this video, I'm going to give you the top 6, and not top 6 as far as, hey, they're so popular, but no, top 6 as far as, hey, these top 6 can make you a lot of money, and here's how much money they have made, for example, in the past 10 years. And just for prefix here, well, these index funds, guys, they have made between 8% all the way up to 23%. That means 3x your money or 7x your money. And by the way, if you don't know, that is a lot of money where all you have to do is, hey, grab some money, leave it in there, and that's it. Forget it. What is it called? Set it and forget it. And by the way, as you watch this video, you will hear me say a lot of letters like VOO. What does that mean? That's a ticker symbol. That's the ticker symbol that we basically use, those letters, to put it into a broker account, into Robinhood, into M1 Finance. That way we can actually find the investment, okay? Because there are over 3,000 investments, so ticker symbols make it a lot easier to find them and not confuse them and buy the wrong ones, okay? It's only 6. Don't buy the wrong ones. That's not what you want to do. And as always, smash the like button. It helps a lot. If you're new here, subscribe and hit the bell so you're notified every time I post a new video. Now, the very first one, guys, is going to be an index fund and also ETF that tracks the S&P 500, one of the most famous indexes out there, which by the way stands for Standard and Poor. Now, this is basically the 500 largest companies in the US. And they say that, hey, these 500 large companies basically give you 80% of all the output of the US economy. So investing into that gives you a really good performance based on the 40-year track record. Now, what I did not know, and you probably did not know, was this. In order for an index fund or an ETF to actually use the name S&P 500, guess what? They gotta pay a fee. So there's 2 options I'm gonna give you here as far as investing. First, I'm gonna give you VOO, which is an ETF that also tracks this index, and that's great. It's by Vanguard, but it does have an expense ratio of 0.03%. And whenever you hear expense ratio, it's basically the fee to basically be investing in this fund. And 0.03%, guys, is nothing. Meaning that if you invest $10,000 in there, it means that you're going to be charged like 25 cents every single month. That's it. If you have $1 million, it's like $25 a month, meaning it's nothing. But there is one that is free, completely free with no expense ratio, and that's the one by Fidelity. And the ticker symbol for that one is FNILX. If you don't remember, here it is right here, VOO and the Fidelity one, but also description is down below with all of the information. Now, for context, whenever you actually are going to invest into an index fund, 3 things you want to look at. You want to look at, for example, the minimum investment, which if you do, for example, an ETF, there is none. And if you are investing into a retirement account, there is none with Vanguard. And you also want to look at, for example, the expense ratio, because that's important. How much are they going to charge? And some out there charge you like 1% or 2%, and that's a lot, by the way. And lastly is performance, and performance is very, very important. So we established that, hey, this is very cheap. So awesome. The performance now, right? Here's the thing. If you had invested $10,000 10 years ago in 2012, that would have turned into $38,903, meaning you would have made around 3.8x by basically tracking the S&P 500. And on top of that, that's basically around like a 16.17% gain in 10 years. And by the way, that is amazing. Now, one thing here, caveat. I am a big fan of Vanguard, Fidelity, and Schwab's. But any investor out there, any broker account out there that tracks the S&P 500 is gonna do the same. So just look at, for example, the expense ratio. If it's cheaper than the ones I gave you, you can invest into it because in reality, it's doing the exact same thing, okay? The exact same thing. So if it can save you money on the expense ratio, go ahead and do it. It's fine. Now, the second index is gonna be the CRSP US Large Cap Growth Index. And by the way, this stands for Center of Research in Security Prices. Pretty long name, kind of crazy. It took me forever to say this. But the idea is they rank stocks with two little variables, okay? Which is basically value and growth. They're trying to find cheap stocks that are also growing and have good value. That's the idea here. Which, by the way, is a lot more different than, say, the S&P 500, because this one is usually somewhere around like 265 stocks that you own at any given time. That's the idea, because it's basically ranked. But overall, if you want to invest to actually track this index, you want to basically invest into this ETF called VUG, and it's basically by Vanguard. Now, if you had invested $10,000 into VUG 10 years ago, it would have turned into $45,000, meaning you would have outperformed the S&P 500, which, by the way, is amazing. That's a 4.5x return, not bad, and that averages out to somewhere around 19.30% a year. Not bad at all. That is awesome. Ask anyone out there, that return is awesome. And again, if you buy the ETF, that way you don't have to worry about, for example, having a minimum investment of $3,000. But if you go over to Vanguard and you type in, for example, VUG, it also shows you exactly what the index fund name actually is. But again, it is going to require a minimum investment if you don't have a retirement account with them. Keep that in mind. Now, this one, guys, is going to be massive. This is the third. Now, there are indexes that track certain sectors of the market. For example, technology sector, the banking and finance sector, or for example, whatever sector there is out there, okay? There's a sector for everything out there. The car industry sector, there is an index fund for everything out there. But this sector that we're gonna be tracking is gonna be the technology sector. And I'm gonna give you an ETF and also the index fund. But again, index funds can be very expensive, and usually they don't let you invest fractional shares. That's why I usually don't suggest them, because most people don't have that much money, honestly. But the ETF is gonna be VGT to help you track the technology sector, and the index fund is gonna be VITAX. Now, here is the minimum investment in this index fund with Vanguard. It's $100,000. Most people don't have that much money. That's why usually I don't recommend them, okay? Because it's a lot of money. So instead of that, just put the money into the ETF that tracks the exact same thing, and you can buy fractions of it and not have to worry about having a lot of money to start. You can do it with $10, $20, $1, does not matter. But here's the idea, guys, okay? This is you trying to track the technology industry. Obviously, technology industry has done great this year. Well, the past decade, actually 2 decades. But the idea is, you know, if you had invested into an index to track the car industry when it first started, you would have made a lot of money. But eventually, everything slows down, like the car industry. Right now, it might be popping off again, but everything slows down. That's more cyclical in a way. Cyclical in a way. But now, technology is awesome. Will it be awesome forever? Eventually, it will also slow down. So I wouldn't recommend put all your money into this one ETF or index fund, because it did make a lot of money in the past 10 years, but that does not guarantee it's going to make a lot of money in the next 10 years, okay? But here's the information. If you had invested $10,000 into VGT, you would have made $63,918. That is a 6.3x return, and that's around a 23.67% return annualized over 10 years. And my friends, that is a lot of money. That's basically beating Warren Buffett without doing any work, just by tracking this sector. Usually Warren makes like 20 to 22%. This is 23%. This is awesome. This is awesome stuff. So if you wanted to have a portion of your money in the technology sector and you believe in it, you think, hey, this is going to be amazing, great for the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, then awesome. But eventually everything slows down. It's just how the world works. Nothing can go up forever. That's the idea. Now, this fourth index is not about trying to make a lot of money, but it's more about trying to get income, which is basically through dividends. So whenever you talk about dividends, imagine like large companies that have consistent dividends. And on top of that, they're not really that risky. That way they can sustain giving you more and more income for the rest of your life. So whenever you think about I want a lot of money in dividends, usually you're not going to experience a lot of growth. So whenever you have, hey, the market is rising like crazy, don't expect to basically like make a lot of money because you're not taking that much risk in a way. And your main focus is going to be basically on making dividend, which does mean income. This is something you basically do. A lot of folks do when they're like in retirement because they care more about consistent income than do, for example, growth. Because at that point, they already have a lot of money. But us young folks, usually you care a lot more about growth and you do dividends during your young age. Now, this dividend, right, investment fund, ETF is actually going to be VYM. Again, you're not going to make that much money. It made around 12.99% a year in the past 10 years, which would have turned 10,000 into 31,000. 3x, not bad, but not that great compared to what we spoke about in this video. And lastly, it does pay around 2.75% in dividends, which by the way is great because these companies, they're large. They're consistent and they have a massive track record for giving you dividends and never skipping dividends and also increasing dividends over time. So whenever you think dividend investment fund, think about, hey, I'm gonna give up a lot of the growth in a way, but I'm gonna get consistent income. Now, if you're looking for both, you want growth and you also want some dividend, you're obviously gonna have a slightly lower dividend but also a slightly higher growth, meaning you're gonna make a little bit more money. Now, these options are gonna be VDIGX, that's an index fund, also by Vanguard, and also VIG, which is also an ETF. Now, this means, okay, although you would make, instead of 2.75% dividend, you'll make around like 1.5 to 1.75, which is a lot lower in a way, but you would have had a higher return over the past 10 years of around 14.44% to around 14.65%. Now, this is a lot of numbers. It basically just means if you want both dividends and growth, you're going to have a lot more growth, but you're going to have a slightly lower dividends. If you want just higher dividends, you're going to have a higher dividends, but slightly lower growth. That's all it means. When you're older, this is cool. But when you're younger, it's okay to take on a little bit more risk because what you really want is to build up the amount of capital you actually have in there. So growth is very, very important. Earnings are very, very important. Now, the final index I'm going to give you is my favorite one. And it's an ETF, but again, it also has an index. And it's actually VEA. That's the ETF. And this tracks the international index. So a lot of European, Middle Eastern, and all of these, for example, like foreign companies, okay? Now, this is my favorite, but it has performed the worst out of all of these other indexes I told you about in this video. So tell me, how is it your favorite? Because although it only made around roughly 8.53%, so 10,000 would have turned into $19,090 in 10 years. Not that great when you compare it to almost like $70,000 in the technology industry. Well, the problem is that this is in this decade. So international companies have not been doing that well compared to us here. But who's to say in the next 10 years with China, Europe, new technology, and things getting a lot closer than they used to? The idea is the next 2 decades or 3 decades, we could see a lot more growth outside of America. So you always want to have this in here to actually balance things out. Now, lastly, I do want to say one thing before this video is over. Consider that these returns are over the past 10 years. Long term usually means 30 to 40 years or 20 to 40 years. So in the long term, the averages would be a lot lower. But in the past 10 years, we've done great. So that's why these numbers are a lot higher. So they're basically skewed. And although these funds have done great, I would not recommend personally to create a portfolio just with these funds because they've done great in the past decade. But in reality, who's to say in the next 2-3 decades when you're 40 or 50 years old, they're actually going to be doing that great. So I would focus more on longevity, having a mix in there to basically make sure you do great, but also are balanced and diversified. So when things go wrong, you're going to be taken care of. Now, if you want to invest the exact same way that I invest with my exact same funds, the idea is I have a link down below to M1 Finance, which is what I use personally, and also Vanguard, but the link is down below. And feel free to click that link. It shows you my investments. You can go ahead and basically copy it directly over if you want to with 2 clicks. Thanks for watching. As always, like, subscribe, hit the bell to get notified. Comment down below any questions. I'm always here answering the comments, so feel free to do so. On top of that, here is another video. Here's my face. If you want to call me one-on-one for free, I have a link down below for that. Thanks for watching, and as always, long-term team out.